long-term objectives and achieve outcomes. So we have chosen for Sweden, Slovenia, Croatia, and Italy. And the assumption was this, Italy and Sweden were the democratic context against which we would compare Slovenia and Croatia. Because during the first round of fieldwork, we found a void on a given governance topic, which is environmental governance and marine governance. And so this project started with this assumption that civil society and NGO are actually performing better in Italy and in Sweden than Slovenia and Croatia. And we, after 1 year of work and data collection, we found out that actually it's not really the case, that contextual features are not only about the democratic structures, they further extend to other issues. And so we have become more closely engaged to what we later on come to refer to, and this is widely also used in the literature. It's called the mobilization strategies that NGO use, differ depending on the context where NGOs are embedded. The second project actually brought up also a lot of interesting data and gaps in relation to how knowledge and scientific knowledge is used by NGOs, and that is now used, and we have already submitted in a third, let's say, sister project, which is aiming to focus more detailing how scientific knowledge or local and traditional knowledge is used by civil society and NGO to pursue given objectives. So that was just briefly for you to show you the evolution of our work, because we always were closely in tune to what happened in the field. We try to take into account and to adjust. In fact, what I'm reporting today is one part of this large 5-year project. More or less, at the year number 2, when we did field work in Italy, a very interesting type of mobilization strategy was observed, and that is what I would like to focus on. But as I would like first to introduce a few concepts, because this summer school is actually very interesting and exciting for me as well. I'm so pleased to see that Predstavitev is welcoming and embracing topics that when I worked in Slovenia were like, we don't need them. So this is a very positive development for Slovenian scientific research. And I have also taken note and seen the questions you have in your roundtable in relation to what is a civil society and how it operates. So I would like just to briefly introduce, and it will not take so much time, because this comparative research that focused across Europe gave us some data and opportunity to reflect on what is happening today in these countries. And although it has been largely discussed, and my Polish colleagues who are active at Sodobno get very angry when they heard the civil society in Central Eastern Europe is not active, or is passive, or is too busy doing other things. They get so angry because there is civil society. It is vibrant, but it has a number of issues to face. Having said that, this is the same in other countries. Just the context differs, and the topics that get priority in the mainstream discourse are different. But saying the civil society is not there anymore would not be correct, both academically and scientifically. So civil society, you might know, is actually approached by two different, like traditionally, by two different disciplines. And that is a sociological viewpoint that mostly focuses on relationships between individuals. And because of that, it would include family and business as part of civil society. The political viewpoint, however, is focusing on actors that aim or take on them the cloth of a political actor, and that would be NGOs, activists, and so on. And this is the definition we embraced, because we, by operating in the domain of environmental governance, we had a view also on how to approach environmental issues. So we picked up the political perspective, and I refer here to the book of Howard Mark. For those who are interested to have a little bit of overview, he is actually one of those guys who says the Central Eastern Europe does not have an active and engaged civil society. It is an old book, so I'm not sure if he has updated his work recently, but we often use it as undertone, as a basis on showing how a democratic transition actually moved on and evolved more recently. So we understood civil society as actors who are distinct from government organization. This is a key label, a key characterizing feature. That is not only that they are not affiliated, but also that they do not receive funds. Because we know the moment you receive funding from, let's say, a government, your integrity is questioned. And we are aware that not many NGOs are actually fulfilling this criteria, like WWF is backed up by national funds. I think so far the biggest one who are not is Greenpeace, who purposefully says we want to be independent, we want to pick up the topics that we engage on freely, and so we don't want public money. And they can take the form, they can be movements, they can be very local, small associations, they can be very profiled, large NGOs, as the one I have mentioned. So as already mentioned, so in not only our project, but more generally in environmental governance, so far I have noticed more interest for the study of civil society from a political viewpoint, which does not necessarily imply or seems to suggest that the sociological perspective is not valuable. For sure it is. It's just that governance as such has certain preoccupations, and that seems to be the framework that best helps that in relation to democratic principles and values and so on. So after the fall of the Berlin Wall, civil society was celebrated. Many foreign donors gave money to Slovenia, Croatia, and so on, to build up a strong civil society, because that was what was assumed to be a pillar, key to maintain and to build, further develop the important rights, such as human rights, justice, and so on, free speech. Civil society has also a role, perhaps not in the early days when we become independent, but perhaps more today, has a role and is asked to keep an eye on the political elite, to watch out. Sometimes in the literature you see them being called the watchdog, because they are assumed to have a role in watching over whether the political elite fulfills what they have promised during election, and whether they are truthful to the mandates they were given by the citizens. So scrutiny and accountability are two aspects on which civil society, and most commonly that would be NGOs, because you need to have a certain level of structure to be able to monitor what's happening on a given policy field, like such as environmental or biodiversity governance. But that is not all. We also need to recognize that civil society has been around much longer than the fall of the wall. Actually, there were the roots of many historical movements. And historically, we also heard from the presentation that was earlier that in the early days, villages and other organizations organized in relation to mutual self-help. So these are four categories that are more or less endorsed by the literature. They divide civil society in the type where they are established or where they are gathering together to help each other So help being provided within a local community by community member, most prominently in areas where, let's say, if you look at the modern time, where the state is absent or not able to support. I have a colleague who is studying, for instance, the provision of services in Holland in relation to care of old and children, of elderly people and children, because the country is not seeing this a priority, and there are no kindergartens, there are very little home care facilities for elderly people, and so the community is getting organized, they form cooperatives, and they are developing this mutual help type of activities. In Slovenia, I think an example which most of you who are Slovenes know is Zveza prijateljev mladine, an association engaged in, on the topic of child poverty and help to minors who have been through difficult times in many different ways. When we talk about levels, so this more local, like state level. At the international level, we also have other types of civil society, or let's say organization, which is the Doctor Without Borders. Then we have a type of civil society which is perhaps closer to the environmental issues, such as service delivery. For instance, I have listed some of them, they are across different countries, so we just mentioned. At the international level, the service delivery, the best known, I'm sure you all heard about this one, is BirdLife International. BirdLife International, as a very large and well-resourced NGOs, actually had a major role in the development and current implementation of what we know to be Natura 2000 protected areas. Because already early on, in the beginning of the 70s, they start to map habitats who back then were seen to be under damage from intensive agriculture. And they have mapped habitats and fluctuation of bird species. And they have produced a huge database which has been used in the late 90s by the European Commission to put a list of areas that each member state was asked or were invited to protect. So as an NGO, actually, perhaps other one that has the most significant influence when it comes to nature protection, biodiversity governance in Europe. In Slovenia, currently we have Društvo za opazovanje ptic, which joined in the 70s BirdLife International, and so today they are understood to be a branch of the other one, but this is at a local level. So in Slovenia, we have the local branch, DOPS, who is engaged in these topics. And I also put amateur activities, because we know that nature protection and generally biodiversity governance has roots in amateur activists, or let's say amateur, those who like and enjoy to be in nature, and they start to track what's happening in nature. If I remember correctly, even our national park, Triglav, is the result of amateur nature protection people who fought for Triglav to be put on, how it's called, the Spomenica 1992, the first National Protection Act in Slovenia. They were educated people, but nevertheless, they were not part of any formal state organization. They were engaged in their free time on topics they believed and felt were important for the broader community. And then you have also the local level, small organization, which delivers service at the local level. This is a case from in Trieste, a cross-border town here by Agencia 2001, who is providing small, service to the municipality, which is of a small scale, such as mapping the habitats or so on. Then another type of activities is political advocacy. This is fairly recent compared to the other two. Like service delivery, perhaps the earliest one that I can think of is BirdLife, when they started to map endangered habitats of birds. But political advocacy started perhaps with, or the one best known to have been doing that is Greenpeace in the 70s, where the atomic bombing, atomic tests were very popular in some places of the world, and we heard what's happening on that part on the atomic experiments. So you probably know the story of these 5 young students, passionate and engaged, and strongly believing that this is not good, what they did. It's history now, but it's still a very important landmarking moment, because it showed, they demonstrated that it's possible with a type of engagement to actually achieve change, political change, which is important as it impacts our lives tremendously. At a local level, we also have small, perhaps less structured, but more fluid. In Italy, it's a very famous no-tau, which are basically movements who gather in relation to protest to big infrastructure. This is no-tau, it has been developed on the border with France in relation to plans Italy has to drill through mountains and develop a tunnel that would connect France with Italy. So there is local community who is engaged on protest in political advocacy on that. And more recently, I think that the first one I became in contact with was about 6 years ago, NGOs who are really trying to work on transformative change. And I'm not talking about, speaking against the elite or speaking truth to power, but they are really engaged on change. So their main work is to explore alternative futures. You might have heard of Urgenda. This is a they're based in Amsterdam, NGO. They work with alternative energy scenarios, and they have been developing a platform of projects where they bring in to local communities alternatives to the mainstream energy supply. So they really want to pursue change. And perhaps it's worth to mention that they have realized at a certain point that while they want to bring about change, it's also important, it becomes important for them to develop, to become in communication with the state. That was not really feasible because the state was not listening. So what they did, they sued the Dutch government on not acting on climate change. It was 2-3 years in the media, 2-3 years ago in the media, you might have heard. They actually won the court case, and so then the court decided that they're right, the Dutch government is not doing enough on climate change, and still out a list of measures for the Dutch government to implement better solution. So Urgenda and BirdLife Internet, and I have placed them in 2 sides, in 2 columns, because they might have at a certain moment of their activistic history performed double role. But of course that also indicates that NGOs are not, that they are also evolving. If we can think of NGOs, for instance, that were in place in Slovenia immediately after 92, they are very different organizations now because they have learned not only what does it mean to speak freely and to act for the public good, they also have learned that there are ways you can do it, and that has impact on which outcomes you are pursuing. So now we have seen that we have civil society of different size they perform different roles. The roles might be overlapping. And they are also very much influenced by the social, economic, and political context. For instance, in my experience with these projects, the context really influences how they engage. So in some contexts, or on some topics, they choose to be more informal, more fluid. We heard also earlier this morning that they don't have structure, they gather, advocate for a subject matter. For instance, Occupy was very popular a couple of years ago, after the economic crisis. Their role, perhaps if we look back, was mostly to raise awareness of a major issue that was not mainstream back then. Some evolve. So if we think about the early natural protection activists, there were just a bunch of people hiking on the Triglav, and they were extremely bothered that people were picking up the Alps Corojo. There was a species that hikers were picking up, and Peter Skoberne has documented that. And so they became engaged, and they get organized, and they formed organizational structures. So you see that some civil society moves from being informal and loose to very structured. If you think of Greenpeace, there were a bunch of young, very passionate students. Today, Greenpeace is a fully organized international organization with structure, with a human resource management department, and they are much more close to a multinational than to a civil society, perhaps, if you look at structure. But they made choices, and they are still performing certain functions. One of the important tasks civil society has in relation to what we refer to the democratic structure is that they are engaged in the public discourse. They are participating in what is known in political science the public sphere, which is a space where topics of broader public interest are developed, shaped, and evolve. This is not only physical space. For instance, if you think of civil society going on the street, marching in big numbers, but it is also an intellectual space, because if you go back not long ago then, in the 30s, in the US, there was a rule, and the rule was blacks, or like people with dark skin do not mix with people with white skin. That was challenged, and was challenged by a civil society movement who created an intellectual space for people to reflect on it. Is this right? Shall we challenge that? And so they create a discourse, and they contribute very much to shape it. A recent example is the Me Too movement. I haven't followed the developments in Slovenia, but elsewhere actually challenged a big amount of stereotypes about division of roles or gender issues that were not ever discussed in the public before. So civil society really has a role not only to present itself physically in the streets, but also intellectually to bring topics to the wider attention, which hopefully and eventually also gains political relevance. So the public sphere is very important area where civil society, NGOs, associations, and so on get engaged. So how they do it was one of the topics of the project we wanted to look at. And we started from the literature, and during the first project, we were mostly focused on, whether NGOs go on the street, do they have media campaigns, do they prefer to have education programs. So in a way, that would communicate to us how they make use of the context and what resources they have, how they use them. And there is a paper that we have published in relation to a Slovene case where we look at the financial, cognitive, symbolic, and social resources that were mobilized by a group of NGOs in relation to Volovia-Reber wind turbines, which were meant to be put on a Natura 2000 site. So mobilization strategy is basically a strategy that different NGOs would use and work on in the pursuit of given objectives. We have made a category, based on literature and our fieldwork, and we started to fill this table, and so we found where there a type of mobilization is direct support, so there is a need, and they help directly a smaller target group who has a given need. And this is a typical example will be association which are put in place at a very village local level because they want to have a better management of the green area, or because they want to put on what we call in Slovene učna pot. So they're very local, there is a need, they feel the need. Then there is a strategy which actually was very much present in our work, in our data collection, is the legal mobilization. So NGOs would mobilize legal tools. So that, if I'm not wrong, was also the case of the EcoCroc, who is the speaker that comes after in the afternoon. So they very much paid attention to what the law says. Is the law respected at this moment? How we, as an NGO, can act to mobilize this platform called law to achieve our end objectives. The case we had, the Volovia-Reber, had components of legal mobilization, and there is a bunch of other cases around Europe that also have these characteristics. Profile advocacy, so that is where NGOs would engage with policymakers. Then the one which we found out that in the literature is written almost nothing, is this epidemiological mobilization, and that's where NGOs mobilize knowledge, data, and resources in relation to health and well-being of the local communities. And this is the one we were particularly intrigued of, on the one hand, because not much was written in the literature. All the others are very well documented. But on this, there is very little literature, not only in terms of cases at hand, but also on how it performs as a strategy. We know legal mobilization strategy, NGOs refer to legal tools, they go to court, they question the impact assessment report, and the objective is the court says yes or no. Or direct support, they collect money, they help a community, and the result is the community gets help. But epidemiological mobilization is fairly unknown. There is no trace on how it is done, on the impact it has on communities, and whether it is effective or not as a strategy. So then we focused very closely on these two cases where we found components of epidemiological mobilization. That's Trieste and Taranto, which I will present later on. But just to finish with the other three, so also in the literature you have theorized awareness raising type of mobilization, where NGOs is engaged on developing or putting out to the public information, so to raise their awareness. Like in Slovenia, I'm not sure what is going on at the moment, but I'm sure that WWF is active, or Greenpeace, on topics which are mostly about awareness raising. Education is another one, and then public protest, which commonly is done by perhaps smaller, more social movement type than NGOs. So, as mentioned, we were extremely intrigued and curious to look closer at this trend, It's not widely found. I'm not saying that everybody is doing epidemiological mobilization, but we had a couple of cases, and so we thought, let's have a closer look at that because of the gaps that are there. So it's not MAP. It is not known if it is effective. And what we actually found very interesting was that it is extremely driven, it is driven by knowledge. So those who are engaging in that, they really need to understand how human health operates in relation to environmental pressures. And that's not so easy, actually, as we might assume. Nonetheless, because even science has not established direct relationship between a source of pollution and human health in a given urban area. And that is very much and very often the core justification why major industrial plants, major polluting facilities are not closed down, although you have such a, you have population, you're having cancer, in every family you have one member having cancer, because science cannot really establish with 100% statistical certainty relationships between different phenomena. And public agencies don't dare to expose themselves. So it is, for us, also a question not only about engagement, but it moves into the sphere of science policy interaction. So in terms of what science do we want, what science do we need, and how we apply it. Because many cases, and I'm not sure whether that was also the case in Slovenia in relation to different polluting plants, they say the sample is too small, we cannot generalize, or we don't know the lifestyle of these people, and so on. So it becomes also, a very interesting question of science policy / civil society interaction. So we had these two cases. We knew them from before. We did data collection in Trieste as part of the first project, and we already interviewed back in 2010 Alessandro Marescotti from Taranto, who back then has just finished some activistic activities on which he told us. And in this round of work, we have mostly done interviews. We have run scoping studies to identify stakeholders, their claims, on which side they are at their sides of the story. We look at archive material, and also we physically went to observe the area, because you, as a researcher, you need to have a contact with the environment, because it is a very much also a question of physical contact. So when they say there was a lot of wind and a lot of fog, you as a researcher should know what that means. And we have seen what that means. There are major differences between La Ferriera di Servola di Trieste and La Ferriera di Taranto. And that we take as one major explanatory component into how differently these two mobilization strategies evolved and how and their related effectiveness. So Trieste, it's a relatively small town, more or less like Ljubljana, and the Ferriera, this industrial plant, it actually stands of, just to show you the picture because it's easier. Where is that? So it's here. Oh, sorry. I think I don't know where is the pointer for that. But just to show you, so Ferriera is small and it's just like this big. This is red. The red are the things that they have to clean out and that actually are causing part of the pollution. So it's just a small part of the larger city. It has, it employs around, I don't know, between 600 to 1,000 people, because you also have to count that these are employed by the Ferriera, but then you have the whole, what they call in Italian, indotto, all the companies that actually benefit and stay alive because of this Ferriera, no? Transport facility and so on. So it has a relatively moderate impact on the local economy. While in Taranto, it actually employs almost half of the people there. I mean, everybody who we talked in Taranto says that that La Ferriera is their life support. I mean, their family depends on jobs of fathers and mothers there. It is a huge plant. It's actually twice, if not 3 times larger than the town. The town is this small bit, this bit here. It's a very small historical medieval town, and all what you see colored, it's the plant. And it's colored because in 2009, the ministry declared this to be a polluted site. So people are trapped between, you see, on the left, on the right. I'm not sure if you, and these two are, I mean, even the sea on the front. So this is the sea. Over there is just some, like, reservoirs. They are also polluted. So the Ilva Steel Factory has been a strategic industry for the whole country, because of the size, because of the amount of people it employed, and it is understood by the political elite as an important support for the community. Servola is not. The government has not really been very much present, and although it has what they call it commissionato, so they have put it under scrutiny, the whole event that took really much shape at the political event was Taranto. There is every day articles in the media, because what happened was that although it has been privatized long ago by the one company, the state still supports it, and that the local community has found out and also denounced it to the European Commission, is in breach of the European law on fair commercial agreement. So now that intervention of the state is under scrutiny. So I will start with Taranto because this is where this epidemiological mobilization really takes shape more concretely. So what happened was that the community was getting sick, but a few, and that is mostly people who are engaged in civil society, start to point fingers to the Ferriera. Nobody really believed them. So what they did, they started to take samples of, first it was a piece of cheese, as a local farmer got grazing land in the nearby, and a lot of 600 sheep died. They got polluted. So what they thought, let's take a piece of cheese after the sheep grazes, and let's put it in an analysis to an independent laboratory. So the analysis returned extremely high amount of dioxin, which Marescotti told us back then was not even known to the local community what it is. That was early, 2002, 2003, 2008, so they never heard about that. And then they took other measures. They got in contact with doctors. Doctors starts to look at trends in Taranto in comparison to other towns and to the whole of Puglia, the region, to find out that actually the mortality and the incidence of carcinogenic disease of young children is very high. So they started to gather data, which was data about human health and diseases, together in a folder, and then they went to the court and again started a legal action. They joined forces, different NGOs between them, and used data collected about human health as a tool to start a case. It has to be also noted that they didn't stop there. They kept working on the relationship between human health and pollution, because they were very much aware that the fight does not stop there. They have to accumulate evidence that there is a link between this huge plant and human health in the community. So they organized sessions where people came, either on the street or elsewhere, and donated blood, so that they could collect evidence of how contamination is stored in people, in residents' body. And they found actually that each, they had like campaigns, that every campaign they had, they actually found that most of the people had a very high amount of contaminants in the blood or other body liquids, and that helped accumulate the case and to build a huge portfolio of evidence that was collected by NGOs. And that is quite interesting, because if you look back at how this country is organized, they have an agency which is responsible for public health, like we have in Slovenia. But the agency who is responsible for public health doesn't have money to run this kind of actions. It costs money to collect blood, to make the test. So NGOs did it, and they produced evidence of something happening in this town. The result is this scene area, which are officially recognized piece of land that is declared polluted and so highly toxic for human health. This is one part. A second important part are the wind days. Mario Scotti told us that he spent days and days and days reading scientific literature in English, biochemistry, chemical, I don't know, all sorts of scientific literature. Why? Because he could not understand what is dioxin, how it impacts on people. He wanted to understand, to be able to work as an activist. By the way, he is a teacher at a high school, so he comes with a given mindset. So he really wanted a type of change. And so he found out that in the US, there is a factory, I don't know where when the industry is fuming red, let me see, like this is the, the whole sky is red. It's polvericcio, which then gets deposited and people breathe. And that is not every day, so that's why it's very hard to capture it. On some days, they cannot, go out, they have to be indoors. But they found out in some place in the US, they call it wind days, when the situation is like this, extremely dangerous for kids, for instance, which explains the condition of younger generation. They put a ban, so kids have to go home, have to stay home. Schools are closing. And so the NGO introduced this proposal, and the municipality accepted it. So on wind days, where the air around your house is like that, the schools are closing, kindergartens are closing, and you're advised to stay indoors. So that was another measure that an NGO introduced, not the public health authority, which actually should. I mean, in the first place, what is this? How this can happen in a country which is having European law on environmental protection transposed in their regulation? This shouldn't happen in the first place. So this is Taranto. Trieste is a different story. It's much lower profile, but because the pollution is, the complex is smaller, the amount of production is smaller, people working there are less. And so what happened was not the whole city mobilized, but just the neighboring community, Servola, which has problems like respiratory. They're mostly respiratory issues. People having, like if you leave, they told us if you leave the window open, then you have like after 1 hour, everything dusted in black. in your house. So they started to mobilize. They also took blood tests. They also organized raids to collect data about human health, their own human health, their own health. But what is interesting is that even, the profile is much lower. They also took a very important pressure towards the local authority. And so because of all this pressure that they're campaigning, going on the street, protesting, at a certain point, the local political elite said, okay, so let these guys shut up, and we are going to run a topsoil test, which is you go in green areas where like parks, then deposit stays there, you collect a sample of the soil, and you run a laboratory test. In this case, it was done by the public health authority. And so they found that seven areas where children play, playgrounds, were contaminated by all sorts of different substances, not only it's pollutants, like I don't now remember the exact list, but it was polluted, and they closed the kindergarten, these places to the population. For 1 year, you had, and I went there every month, you had red tape all around playgrounds where children were supposed to play. But the funny thing was that the playgrounds were full of kids and mothers. They keep using them. Nobody came there to enforce it. So it really looked like, where is the political elite? What are they doing? I interviewed a keeper, and I asked, why you have the tape? And he said that this is going on, and he has received an instruction not to touch the grass. And then I asked, but there are kids playing over there. If it's so dangerous that you cannot touch the grass, how come they can play? And their answer was, nobody looks after it. After 1 year, the Giunta Comunale, which is like the elected body of the municipality, changed political colors. We still have the red tape over there. Nothing has changed. The kindergarten is still declared polluted. No bonifical activities were undertaken. And the current political elite is not doing very much. So the authorities are completely absent in that case, as they are in the other case. What is happening is that civil society again is moving not only to denounce how that impact on your health, but they are organizing alternative options for families who have small kids to spend their time. And they keep being active on mobilization strategy with the aim for the closing down of these two industrial facilities. So we have done field work, and here I report on results that mostly focus on the strategy as such. So we have found a lot of interesting data and trends in relation to how knowledge was used, but that is a different topic, and we used a different framework, so I'm not going into detail of that, and how they did it, and how many people show up, and how people felt about donating blood to find out that they have pollutants in their body. So it's a really complex and interesting story. But let us look and conclude a little bit about this type of mobilization strategy. So as a first thing, what we noticed, and we talked also to public authorities, when we did interviews, we clustered that much activists, that much normal people, that much public representatives such ARPA or Public Health Authority, because we wanted to hear all different parts of the story. So we find out that it is a strong critique. I mean, by exposing and by bringing your own blood sample where there is a level of pollution, you basically show that something is not right here. somebody is not doing their duty. And that's not only the political elite, which we know is changing and it's hard to keep them accountable, but they are actually public authorities that are failing on their mandate. This strategy also exposes failures in what in Europe we know to be polluters pay principle, and this is supposedly widely in place across member states. Accountability is exposed, or the myth of accountability. Policy integration, because we know that if you pursue industrial development, they shouldn't be harming health, at least, if not also the environment. In both were Italian cases. So what we also looked at is cultural components. And it was very interesting for us to find out that in many conversations we had, people exposed that they have to work, they have to live there, they have to go to the factory working. They really don't want, they don't have choices. So we found components of what we refer to be a social compromise. A social compromise in terms of we are here, we need this industry to sustain our well-being, our families economically, and we compromise our health in order to have that. It's worth to be mentioned that in the first article of the Italian Constitution, it says, Italy, it's a democratic republic built on labor or work. So when, after the war, Italy was brought together as a country, values around getting on the job market, having unemployment were precious. And people really identify through that. They feel that they are valuable human beings when they have a job. So we recurrently heard in our interviews, activists who were teachers told us that even kids at school, when they organize assemblies to discuss this, problem, bring forward, but my mom and dad have to go to work there. We have to have, it's a social stigma if you're unemployed. So it's also cultural, the way they perceive themselves in relation to the society has a component of why that is going on. We also found that at a micro view, at the level of individual, that it is a shockwave. This mobilization strategy compared, let's say, to awareness raising or political advocacy, where NGOs actually target politicians, it has a completely different impact on people. Mario Scotti told us, when they started, nobody really knew back then in Taranto what is dioxin, how it impacts your health, and what does it mean to have to be exposed to this, and which kind of diseases you can get out of that if you are overexposed. So people started to have cases of cancer, of endometriosis. It impacts reproductive health. Kids got sick, died of cancer. So it really exposed the scars and the suffering, because you emphasize through your media campaigns, through your activism, the impact on a very sensitive matter, which is your health and the health of your loved ones. So while it has high potential in awareness raising, and the implementation of the wind days is a direct result of that. People really keep indoors when you see this red smoke. We also found that it can be disempowering. We conducted interviews, were very challenging interviews for us, because as researchers, because you touch on such a sensitive matter, and people broke down. Activists, the main representative of Genitori Tarantini, which is an NGO that looks after and campaigns for the families of young kids who died out of cancer, he broke in tears. It was very hard for us to manage that interview, because we did not expect that. We thought it's a sensitive topic. We followed all the protocols, in terms of making the right environment and so on. But you could see in him and in many other speakers, interviewees we talked to, they had a sense, because of all this emphasis on disease and on the impact on the community, they had this wish to come out to somebody who was not perhaps their fellow and speak about issues. They told us much more than what we needed to answer in relation to the disease problem. We mostly were focusing on which knowledge and how knowledge was used in relation to, blood tests and so on. We didn't really look after personal testimonies of how that was handled. So we found that it can be disempowering, but then we talked to NGOs also who had a little bit more of a long-term view. In fact, they were not dealing with people with families of people with issues, but they were more looking into the alternative, like the future for Taranto. Can we do it without ILVA? Can we survive as a community without ILVA employing that many people? And they actually were more empowered, because they also managed to achieve certain objectives. So those were the guys implementing the wind days. We also find out that this really unclear potential for behavioral change, because also our sample was very small, so we are not very sure how that epidemiological mobilization happened at the level of individual. But it definitely, when overlapped with legal mobilization, definitely can bring about change, because you expose issues with the law. And you bring data that public agencies are not able to collect, which can be used in court cases and so forth. What we also find out is that in Taranto, not much in Trieste, but in Taranto, that we as a society perhaps are not really sure how to discuss about sensitive topic as this one in the public sphere, and the consequences it can have on the community. Because as an NGO, they act strategically. So you would expect them to foresee what's happening in the community. Nevertheless, they do that for the benefit of the community. And so what we actually find surprising was this sense of hopelessness. We really didn't expect it. So we again identified as a side effect of this type of mobilization, because you're so overexposed with this picture you see. These are chairs of kids who died of cancer, and they have this all across the town. They have been WWF, which should be looking after biodiversity, birds, and so on. What they did, they cut in cardboard images of people who died. They took, the dead list, and they started to cut, and they put names. So you walk, along the street, and you have constant reminder of actually how bad it is for your health. And we did not expect that. They also have not thought about that. The NGOs wanted to bring about this topic because they felt it's important, but they have not really accounted with the implication on individuals. We felt, when we discussed that in our group, we felt that's a little bit like Charlie Hebdo journal, when they discuss a public topic in the public sphere, which they thought is important. They criticize religion, but what they get back was anger from some groups. And so we felt that in this case, again, the intentions were, perhaps constructive. They use data in a given way, but they also contribute in some part of the community to develop a sense of hopelessness and defeat, which they have not handled, because nobody really looked after that. It's about 60 NGOs are engaged in Taranto on this topic, from different profiles. So from a environmental governance point of view, this is actually a quite interesting type of mobilization, not only because it brings together issues with policy integration and, you know, links back environmental with social justice, because health is also a question of social justice, but it also it's interesting also because it emphasizes the role of data and knowledge, the contested nature that we, you know, that scientific knowledge has in such cases. And also interesting is because it's emphasizing the social compromise that the communities actually felt that they should take on and accept. You know, they should accept that somebody in this family will have cancer because we would like to have unemployment. So that was quite interesting from that point of view, and it also links back to these values of capital accumulation and these trends in what type of society we want to live in. We found the NGOs still had a very major role in challenging established views, because if NGOs would not start to speak out of dioxin, of cancer, and so on, nobody would. And the situation would be worse. We wouldn't have the wind day ban, they wouldn't have the court case, which is now going to European Court of Justice, and in the short, but also in the long term, things would be very different for them, much worse. So that is now for the mobilization strategy on use of health-related data. I thank you very much for following me in this presentation. So if you want to follow up more of our work, you can look at the website. Some papers were published. We still plan to publish more and hopefully perhaps have a follow-up project that looks more closely at the knowledge component in that. So thank you.
Okay, thank you, Romina. I find it very interesting because it is important for non-governmental sector to know how to, what are the consequences if you use this type of strategy or what can happen. Okay, so let's proceed to the questions.
Hello, I'm Jivaka Global Focus. I wonder if you did look into the influence of the discourses, the power, like structures used, like the state and the municipality, I mean those who are kind of governing the areas, what kind of discourses they used when they were talking to the public. Because let's say in the cases in Slovenia, it happened that the public discourse was actually occupied by the decision maker statements. We are going to provide jobs in the areas where there are many unemployed people, no matter of actually consequences for health, quality, or water, or land, or whatever. So actually also the inhabitants of the areas were inclined towards, okay, like the same, like it was written, we need the industry to sustain us, we compromise our health, we compromise the environment. So how was this relation, and what kind of discourse they used, and how was it accepted in the society?
Yeah, absolutely the same, because both actually are industries that date really long back in time. So several even date back to the the roots, the first, workshops were during the Habsburgs. So it's also part of the local, identity and the structure. It is part of it. So the politicians wants to keep the status quo. They have this, view. We need it. It serves us because it employs people in both cases, that both at the local level and the national level. So that is the same as the case you mentioned. But what perhaps, I'm not very sure how that happened in Slovenia, what this epidemiological strategy really helped to is it was like a punch in the head of the people. you know, they kind of start to realize that the reason why they have in their family at least one person with cancer is the factory. You know, that was awareness, like a realization that was not there earlier. You know, the sickness was always present because these are companies that are around for more than 200 years. But the link was not there. You know, people get sick, this is not so. And because nobody really, you know, in the public discourse, like the health agency never really made a relationship. They always say, oh, but this is not so, you know, we don't have scientific evidence and so on. So that is here as well, yeah. And they want to keep it up, you know, even now. I mean, in Taranto, it's so obvious. Now we have such a big amount of data that it's so hard for them to say, you know, this seat area, it's a ministry-recognized, highly polluted area. You know, you should not live there. But people are living, you know. The ministry is recognizing this is polluted, this is extremely dangerous for your health, and still they don't want to close down the company. They don't want. They inject public money, you know, tax money, who should better go to, I don't know, to make bonifical intervention or put schools somewhere where you don't have this smog, or, you know, you have 1,000 million other political intervention which could be much better, then they are not doing it. They give money. And that is another part. Maybe we had a comment earlier about, you know, corruption and lobbies. We have not looked at that because this is not part of our research agenda. That's perhaps more hardcore political science question, but there are reasons why, after so many years and so much evidence, they are still standing and running.
Davor Inžinerič, prihajam iz Zasavja in s tem, kar ste pravkar predavali, popolnoma strinjal. Tako kot bo kolega Macer malo kasneje povedal, jaz vidim tukaj, vsaj v Sloveniji, preveliko sprego ali pa soodvisnost ali pa podporo politike kapitalu. Tukaj se vsaj v primeru Zasavja dogajalo, da se je politika dejansko tudi lokalna kot državna postavila na stran kapitala, nasproti ljudem in tudi dejansko ovirala nas kot okoljevarstvenika, okoljistov, kakorkoli temu reče, okoljsko zaveščeno ljudi, da smo na vsakem koraku dejansko imeli zelo velik problem priti do informacij. In tudi tisto, ko ste prej omenili, da socialno komponento dejansko je pri nas bila zelo izrazita. Moram povedati to, da so v dveh največjih obremenjevalkah v regiji, to se pravi v termoelektrarni Trbovlje in pa v cementarni Lafarge, imeti prednostno zaposlitev ljudi z okolice teh tovarn. Dejansko so že takrat, ko so ti tovarnarji postavljali ali pa zaposlovali ljudi, vedeli, da bodo s tem nekako si olajšali pot pa delovanje, čeprav so ti ljudje tudi dejansko, kot ste prej omenili na primeru Trsta in pa Taranta, zbolevali za rakom in še zbolevajo za rakom in so se, bom rekel, načrtno ali pa temu bi se rekli, zavestno odločili za delovna mesta, nekako se pa niso odločili za zdravje. In to je zdaj velik problem. Tudi rekli ste nevladne organizacije. Prej je dr. Čodrkov omenil, da se treba tudi politično angažirati. Jaz se s tem popolnoma strinjam. Treba je doseči to, da se bo tudi del civilne družbe začel aktivno ukvarjati s politiko, ker vemo vsi, da dejansko če ne bomo imeli vpliva na tistih odločevalskih strukturah, ki imajo moč odločanja, potem lahko tudi, glede na to, da te nevladne organizacije velikokrat nimajo dovolj denarja ali pa sredstva, tako kot si lahko privoščijo kapital z nekimi milijonskimi dobički, da je na dolgi rok to lahko recimo res velik entuziazem, in da je potrebno tudi delovati, se pravi, kot smo že rekli, v korist javnosti ljudi in pač spodbujati resnico, kar v našem primeru, vse primeru Zasavja veliko krat je bilo tako. Samo toliko kot en medklic.
Hvala.
Ok, še kdo? Samo da pogledam. Okay.
Vesna Kalak-Lemišič. Ministerstva, hvala za vašo zanimivo prezentacijo. Ko ste zbirali te primere iz prakse, me zanima, če ste tudi gledali primere okrog Luke Koper ali pa mogoče primer Škocjanskega zatoka, ker se pa nam zdi, da je vseeno primerane take pozitivne prakse, ker se pa nevladne organizacije in pa administracija na nacionalni ravni in politika nekako usoglasili, da gredo v isto smer proti vizavi nadaljnji devastaciji tega prostora in se je prišlo potem do sanacije. Taka zadeva v bistvu zelo počasna, traja vrsto let, da so vsi ti koraki izpeljejo, ampak je pa primer, ki pa kaže, da prvič so NGO-ji lahko zelo kompetenten partner, dobri upravljalci zavarovanih območij in da se da tudi na tak način dosežete cilje varstva okolja pa boljšega življenjskega okolja.
Shall I answer in English? No? Ja, smo popisali več primerov po Sloveniji, mnogo jih je bilo pozitivnih, ampak recimo najbolj nas je pritegnilo zaradi narave vprašanj, ki smo imeli v projektu, primer Volovje Reber na Slovenskem. Moram reči, tudi Ekokrog smo imeli 2 leti na opazovanju kot možno vključitev študije primera. Smo se pol pa odločili, da nadaljujemo z Volovje Reber, ker je imel 2 komponenti, ki se nas so zanimale. Eno je bilo ta strong and weak sustainability, tako nas je malo zanimalo pogledati in uporabo teh resursov. In nasploh pač, kako slovenske NGO se povezujo med sabo, tako da tisto nas je zelo tale networking approach, ko so pač postavljena na nogo mrežo, ki je pol posredovala. In Natura 2000 je bila kar takrat tema. Ampak absolutno Slovenija ima več primerov, torej tega, ko ste vi omenila, pa tudi druge, ki so pozitiven primer sodelovanja med nevladnimi in državnimi ustanovami.
Ok, še kdo? Ok.
Jaz pa mogoče imam nekonvencionalno vprašanje. Zdaj se je govorili, da smo pokritizirali državne zdravstvene institucije, ki recimo niso pri epidemiologiji naredile dovolj. Sam, kar imam jaz izkušnje z civilno sfero v Sloveniji, okoljsko, pogosto ali pa povprečno je dosti psevdoznanstvena. Torej, recimo, če je epidemiološke raziskave, niso voda na njen mlin, torej niso pozitivne, oziroma ne podpirajo njenega mnenja, eksplicitno to zavrnili. Torej, recimo isto, če bi neki znanstveniki ali iz Univerze v Ljubljani ali državnih institucij, ARS-ov, karkoli, trdili drugače, kot je mnenje civilne sfere, bi to takoj zavrnili, a priori ne reflektirano. Tako da me zanima, če imate mogoče kakšne primere iz vaših raziskav, ki so pokazali, ne vem, ali da nevladne organizacije ali pa civilna sfera spremenijo svoje mnenje, ali pa kako naj postanejo bolj znanstvene.
Mislim, to je zanimivo vprašanje. Recimo mi s tistim nadaljevalnim projektom želimo prav to pogledati. Torej, kaj je danes vloga nevladnih organizacij? Ker opažali smo, da če dalje več nevladne posegajo po znanstvenem, po podatkih, ki so znanstvene narave, jih ni, mnogokrat jih ni. Kaj se dogaja, da sami jih producirajo? Torej, gredo nekako v konkurenco z sfero znanosti. Ker protokoli, ki jih ponavadi uporabljajo nevladne, niso znanstveni. Zdaj ne vem, koliko ste tle morda v Sloveniji slišali, je bil en zelo odmeven primer nemškega etimološkega društva, ki je opravil longitudinarno raziskavo, ki je trajala skoraj 40 let v populaciji insect population somewhere in the south of Germany. dokazali so preko njihovih zbiranja podatkov na terenu, to so bili amateur epidemiologist, dobili so podatek, statistično preverjen in analiziran, da je upad žuželk. Kaj to pomeni? To pomeni, da je okolje preobremenjeno in da trenutne varovalke, policy measure niso ustrezno implementirane. Njihov članek je dobil ogromno odziva v Guardianu, v teh internacionalnih revijah. Znanost pa se je odzvala izjemno kritično. Jaz imam kolege iz Anglije, ki so pisali po blogih, osebnih blogih, o blogih njihovih laboratorijev, da ta študija ni znanstvena, torej ima manjšo vrednost, ker jo niso izvajali znanstveniki, ne? Kar zelo izpostavlja to dualnost vlog, kdo je kompetenten za kaj, za kakšno zadevo, ne? Ali civilna družba zdaj lahko prevzame določena naloga, ki je tradicionalno znanostih v naši družbi imela, in če je to sprejemljivo in se mi kot družba se strinjamo, kakšno vlogo ji damo v produkciji znanja. Ali jim dovolimo, da ne upoštevajo protokolov. Znanost ima zelo precizne, konkretne, več kot 200 let dogovorjene protokole. Test, retest, scientific method in tako naprej. NGO se s tem ne ubadajo. Njihov cilj je, da dosežejo en outcome, kateri sloni na vrednotah. Znanstvenik, ki dela v laboratoriju, se ne ubada z vrednotami. On meri, šteje in analizira. Ali to dobro, slabo, njega to ne zanima. No, tradicionalni pogled na znanost. In to je tista zanimiva stvar, ki iz naših študij je zelo prišla v vidik, je ne samo to, da se spreminja vloga nevladnih v kontekstu Science Policy Interface, torej oni producirajo podatke, ki jih službe ne morejo, ker nimajo dovolj resursov, ampak postanejo nekako tudi konkurenca znanstvenikom, kateri tradicionalno so malo nerodni, ko je treba komunicirati znanost publiki, ko je treba iti v interakcijo s politiki. Jaz ne vem, v Sloveniji ne poznam, koliko se naši slovenski znanstveniki pogovarjajo in ponujajo rešitve in podatke slovenski politiki. Ali jih politika jemlje resno, ali jih gleda kot nekega, pač, ko bi rekla, malo preveč nad knjige zagrebenega profesorja. Aktivisti znajo, kako izraziti problem, znajo se obnašati v politični sferi, ker so se to naučili skozi desetletja, ne? Tako da nekako padejo malo v konkurenco z znanostjo. In to upamo, da bomo dobili resurse, da bomo naprej lahko raziskali, tako po Sloveniji, kot ta primer, ki sem omenila iz Nemčije, in tudi na Poljskem ima en zelo zanimiv primer, ki se ubada s tem.
Ok, ker smo že malo čez, sem še to gospodno vprašanje. Gospod Tan, pa vas bi prosil, če bi potem šli lahko do doktor Romina, pa je potem vprašali, če je v redu.
Hello. Sorry. Thank you for your presentation. I would like to do two questions. First, in the beginning of your presentation, you used a lot the term civil society. And I would like to ask you, and we saw the presentation that it was mostly focusing on environmental NGOs. Why did you use this terminology? Because sometimes it's a little bit vague what civil society consists of, and it also can be co-opted by specific economic discourses when the states withdraw from services that offer traditionally, then civil society can take up this role. So at least in Greece, we're trying not to use this terminology because it's associated with neoliberal policies. And the second one, it's about you mentioned epidemiological strategy. And why do you see that as a strategy and not as a tool? Because in our case, in Skourges, in North Greece, we had the hugest at the extraction movement in Greece. And there were scientists from medical school that conducted research about the residual cadmium that produces sterilization, cancer, and even master death. I cannot translate that, but it's very bad. And it was a tool. And also environmental NGOs, in collaboration with researchers, they made local research about the impact that it would have on animals that were protected. So they, both the academics alone and the NGOs with academics, they thought that this is a tool in order to raise awareness or to use in the legal court. So why to have another strategy, but I not see it as a tool that can be used by the other strategies?
Yeah, so perhaps I will give a very academic answer to both of your questions. Is we started from definitions. So in our project, when we were choosing whom we're going to interview, and we made scoping studies, we found out that it's not only NGOs that are there, but there are more fluid movements, people who gather. And those are movements, they're not NGOs. They gather, they text each other, they organize, very fluidly. So we wanted to capture the whole spectrum of different level of organization. The slide I had before, from informal to formal. Formal meaning that they have a statute, they have members who are paying a fee, they have assemblies. So we wanted to capture the whole spectrum of groups. And so we choose for a broad definition of civil society, which is this one, that allowed us to talk to different groups. So this is the answer for you. And we also embrace the political definition, which is, focused on civil society as political actors and looking at, a power structure and so on, instead of the the sociological view, which was, for instance, first put in place by Bourdieu, who looks at relationships. So we were not so much interested in the relationship between different, family and so on. And in terms of mobilization strategy, we actually develop a definition which is based on the use of resources for a given purpose. And so we saw this to be a strategy because they use resources, not only economic, financial resources, but they also use resources in terms of symbolic. I didn't have time to tell you more about Peace Link. They have huge amount of symbolic resources because of how they choose to grow as an NGO over time. They resourced to that. In fact, it was Peace Link that filed the case at the Taranto court and then took the leadership to further on go up to the European Court of Justice. The same was with the vlogo cases in Slovenia. Symbolic resources are very important because they give credibility to those who expose themselves as the mobilizers in where you have many NGOs. So we saw this epidemiological strategy as a strategy on its own right because it really differs from the others. The fact that they had to resource to data collection focused on human bodily fluids has specific implications. And, they talk to people on the streets. They did not talk to politicians as a first case. They first addressed the citizen. And here, you have education, you have awareness raising, but you give them, you don't take from them. They took blood and urine and other liquids from citizens. And this is not a minor issue. This is your own belonging, and under the law, it should be anonymous. Your doctor cannot give out information about your health to anybody unless you have some, court cases. So it's a very sensitive issue, and it's has a specific place in, in the structures we are currently in. So that's why we define it as a strategy on its own right, because it has to take into account law on property, on personal information, on how to handle epidemiological risk. It has such a major implication on a bunch of other issues. Like if you take blood and by coincidence you find out that you have, I don't know, malaria or other contagious disease, they are accountable for that. So they have to take steps to prevent responsibility and to organize and structure the activity where everybody gave blood in a way that was safe and, according to established law. I'm not sure if I made myself so, but it's not only about, the definition, it's really about the procedure. So all this, you talk to somebody, you talk to politicians, you talk to, you educate somebody, you go on the street, you protest against somebody, but in epidemiological mobilization, they ask people to give them something which is highly regulated and difficult to handle. So it was a very, they had to be prepared and pack it in a given way. Aha. Okay, sorry, yeah, I will be shorter, yeah, thank you.
Good afternoon. Because we were talking before about methodology, more or less, while you were mentioning your research, like your interviews, you said that they kind of got like emotional, talking about the crisis, etc. Do you think that you and other researchers, you still can be far from the object of research and still do a neutral research, like, because it seems that it's not so easy to continue to be distant from the object, like which a core feature of like scientific research.
Yes, actually, it is extremely hard to to not get emotionally involved. You talk to people, they tell their stories. You also feel as a researcher that you owe them something. But what we try to do in my team is to, we take more a constructivist approach. We acknowledge that we are not machines. I have my own value system, that very likely influence my choices of the research topics. I'm living actually 20 minutes by car from Trieste. There is a relationship between why I choose these cases and where I'm coming from as a person. Having said that, I also want to be strictly academic because I understand the value that good work can have, not only for science, but also for people. So what we do, we follow protocols closely. And we do so also in a way that does not harm them. Because if, for instance, this is not the first time somebody breaks into tears during an interview, so I also kind of already having a protocol how to handle that, and that is important, because they open up, they share their life story, and you cannot just play ice, you need to do something with that, and leave the interview with a sense of comfort, that they feel safe, that they will not think, okay, now, especially when you are I'm a woman and that was a man in his 70s who has a position in society. So I understood it was important that we close the interview in the best way for him to feel safe and encourage that this data, this sharing, this opening up of his heart will be handled professionally and not, just put under the carpet like nothing happened, So we also then, with my assistant, for each interview, we choose to record the emotional reaction, not only, data, so that we could keep track. And that's where, this sense of hopelessness emerged. We didn't look for it before, it just appeared during the interview. So we kept trace of that. And now this is a new finding that we didn't really, expected, which we will handle. We will prepare protocols and we will handle in a way that is best for for him and that keep us still in a very, professional position.
Thank you. We are 15 minutes late, so I would say if everybody agrees to take one more question, or if majority says we're finished. Really quickly.
Moram dati repliko in moram se odzvati na to. Rekli ste, da so znanstveni krogi naravoslovnih sfer indiferentni. Tukaj in res moram stopati v zagovor, da če pogledate zadnjih 20 let so te sfere dislocirane od financ. Država Republika Slovenija ne namenja finančnih sredstev za neodvisne raziskave. Večinoma so te raziskovanje, se pravi, da so postali nekako polovično privatizirane tudi univerze, ki za denar pač opravljajo določene naloge, ali pa so povezani v večinoma in uspešni, se pravi, v projektih, ki so širše narave. Torej, za lokalno sfero neodvisnih raziskav ni. Ni jih ne v medicini, ni jih ne v farmaciji, ni jih niti v okolju. Se pravi, ko morda izsili neka neodvisna organizacija ali nevladna ali morda lokalno, potem se naredi. Sama sem imela priložnost narediti nekaj raziskav, vendar je bila to vedno civilna iniciativa, tako smo recimo pregledovali na mestni občini Ljubljane, kjer imamo lokalni dovoz zelene solate in smo pred leti v okviru trojne moram nekaj, ampak denar je vprašanje, ne? Ker se ne namenja denarja, teh raziskav ni. Bom nekaj.
Ne, se strinjam. Ja. Slovenija ima zelo močen problem financiranja znanosti. Odkar sem jaz aktivna raziskovalno, sem to opazila in kot pravim, ni slučaj, da sem končala na sodobno. Takšno raziskavo nikoli več mi jo ne bi financirali pod RRS. Fati, mi smo tudi imeli eno študijo, smo naredili intervjuje z slovenskimi raziskovalci, ki so dobili sredstva na RRS in ena ugotovitev je bila, da se financira raziskovalna dejavnost, ki ne postavlja kritike, ki dela problem solving, torej rešuje probleme okoljske, ne? Problem solving, ampak kritiko status quo ne postavi, ker zmanjka resursov. Če pošlješ ti na teren, naredi 200 intervjujev, analiziraš podatke, ti ne ostane časa, da potem upelješ, filozofijo, pa sociologijo, pa oblikuješ kritiko. Zato tudi sem zelo vesela in mi je veliko radost, da ste organizirali ta dogodek, ki se končno postavlja. Upam, da boste tudi kaj napisali in da bo šlo objavo, da tisti, ki sedijo na določenih mestih, se bojo zamislili, ker v končni fazi to je v škodo celotni družbi. In moram tudi povedati, ne da jih branim, ampak imela sem kontakt z RRS, delajo dobro njihovo nalogo. Ne? Tako da v bistvu kot agencija, ki disbursira denar, opravijo, za kar so postavljeni. Tako da jaz na njih prste ne bi kazala, ampak bi res na science policy, ki v Sloveniji ne obstaja. In mislim, da že več let, tudi je debata, ZRC, mislim, da je tudi že bil aktiven na to temo, tako da je čas, da se malo začne bolj aktivno kritizirati in iskati alternativne vizije. Ampak, če še kdo ima kakšno vprašanje, magari se lahko pogovorimo ob coffee breaku, ker je...
Just a quick comment, please. I'm glad to see that the corporate capture of science is in Europe, but also international, and there's a huge literature exposing this problem, the corporate capture of the state and the corporate capitalist capture of scientific endeavour. And just to take issue a little bit with your comment that people cannot do science because they're motivated by values. There's a very well-known aspect of science called people's science, and associations called science for people, which precisely reground scientific exploration at that level, and also to draw attention to the importance of indigenous science, who are inventing all kinds of methodologies of understanding of natural processes that are beyond the methods of expertise which Europeans have developed. So,
yeah, thank you. In fact, I just want to say a word. I want to acknowledge, you're from Australia, right? You mentioned. I read an exciting paper about indigenous knowledge that understood long back in time that there is a bird species, somewhere in Australia, that uses fire to capture mammals. They pick up fire pieces and they dropped it elsewhere, so all small mouses would gather together and they could. And that's a fabulous example of indigenous knowledge by observation. So that's also how science started, by observing phenomena. And so that really needs to be acknowledged and brought in. And that's why the question of what role civil society has in relation to science policy, it's very actual, very interesting. Thank you.